Managing Director and one of the analysts here at the Real Story Group, and I am happy to welcome you to the latest installment in Real Story Group's webinar series. Today we'll be talking about best practices for selecting technology, but in a hurry. It's a very interesting topic, I think, because it's something that we get asked about quite a bit, and I'm happy to pass on some of the best practices that we've learned from advising a number of clients on this topic throughout the years. So, without further ado, I know you are all in a hurry, and we have 30 minutes today, so let's get to it. The first bit of housekeeping, though, is this webinar is co-sponsored by our friends at CMS Wire, and if you haven't heard already, they're launching their first or brand new conference called the DX Summit, which is going to be held this November in Chicago. And it's a really exciting conference that we'll be participating in here at Real Story Group. And we encourage you, if you're interested in checking that out, we'd love to see you there. So please check it out, DX Summit, and get all the information there. So the agenda today is pretty simple. We'll start out, as always, with some perspectives and disclaimers. Then we'll get right into those 6 tips and best practices for selecting technology in a hurry. And if there's time, we'll finish up with some Q&A. The first question that we always get is, will you get a copy of the slides? And the answer, as always, is yes. Anyone registered for this webinar will get the slides. And any of our subscribers, and I can see many familiar names on the screen right now, and I know there are a bunch of subscribers online, you'll be getting the full recording as well. So for those new people on the line, let's talk about Real Story Group just quickly. So we're fundamentally an industry analyst firm. We cover about 250, or actually more than 250 products from over 170 different software vendors. And what we do is we produce research that aims to analyze the weaknesses and the strengths of these tools and the vendors themselves. Some liken us to a little bit like the consumer reports of the industry, where we help buyers make really smart technology decisions. So that's one half of our business and really the core of everything that we do. The other half is really the consulting side of the house. Here is where we help clients in really 3 different ways. One, to build technology strategies and roadmaps. 2, we do in-house technology audits where we come in and look at your existing technology and assess it versus what's out there in the marketplace. And thirdly, we help companies go through product and vendor selection processes. Many of those lessons that we've learned from helping dozens of clients go through that process is what I'll be talking about here today. As I mentioned, we're an industry analyst firm. We are bit different than some other analyst firms that you might be familiar with, in that, and one of those big core differentiators is that we're laser focused in our coverage areas. We only cover what we call content-based technologies that fall into the 2 categories of digital marketing technologies and digital workplace technologies. So things like web content and experience management, digital and media asset management, really just 8 different marketplaces that we focus on quite a bit. Another key differentiator that we're quite frankly very proud of is that we are passionately vendor neutral, and we only work on behalf of technology users and buyers, and never for the vendors that produce these different solutions. We've been around for quite some time, and we have well over 3,000 customers in more than 60 countries, and that gives us a bit of a different perspective here, and we're able to come up with some learnings from many different companies across many areas of the globe, and we try to pass that along to you, our subscribers. So over the years, in helping organizations go through the technology selection process, we have come up with a methodology for helping those organizations go through a vetting process and really help them test their different options, both from a technology perspective and a vendor perspective, to ensure that they're making the best possible decision that's the right fit for what it is they're trying to do. And so we try to codify this process under a term we call RSVP, or Real Story Vendor Procurement. And if we had much more time and we were advising you on the right way to select technology, we would be probably walking you through all 20 steps of this RSVP process. So it's 6 stages that you can see on the left side, and really 20 distinct steps that we advise our clients to take. Now, the most successful projects that we've seen undertaken have gone through many of these steps, if not all of these steps. So it's rare for us to be recommending shortcutting this process, but we understand that reality is such that sometimes you have to shortcut these processes. So this disclaimer is important. Please do not be mistaken. Real Story Group doesn't recommend shortcutting this process if you don't have to. We really recommend that you take your time and do your due diligence at every step of the way so that you're ensuring that you're making a smart decision. But again, we understand reality, and some of those realities come in the form of fiscal timelines. I'm sure all of you have been in a situation where there's money to be spent by the end of a calendar or fiscal year, and you've been given a task to go pick a technology solution. Sometimes you're in a situation where your incumbent vendor contract is expiring and you have to get onto something different, and that's causing you to hurry. Or maybe there's just a critical business initiative in your organization that's requiring new technology to be brought in. And these are all just realities in today's world, and that we have to be conscious of. And sometimes you can't wait 3 to 6 to 12 months to select a new technology product. Sometimes you need to fast track that as quickly as possible. But what I'm hoping to share with you today is some techniques to make sure that while shortcutting this process, that you're still making smart decisions along the way. So best practice number 1. Avoid the temptation to scale down your selection team. I can't tell you how many times we see organizations who are really in a hurry to pick new technology. One of the first things they do is they say, well, let's lessen IT's involvement on our selection team. Let's just go on our own and make this decision ourselves. And I don't want to pick on just marketing folks, because IT folks do the same thing. Sometimes that IT folks will say, let's not involve the marketing side or the business side of the house, and let's just bring in what we think is best. And that's really where these projects tend to go off the rails right up from the outset. So I always encourage our clients from the outset to think about who are the right people that need to be involved with the selection. And every selection team looks a little bit different, but there's a variety of different roles that undoubtedly needs to be represented. Now, expanding that selection team when you're trying to shortcut this process may seem counterintuitive, but what we found is that it actually gives you a much better 360 view of the situation. So instead of just your narrow view of a situation, you're able to get more people's opinions heard from the outset, and from the outset is really the important phrase there, because where we've seen this go awry is the important stakeholders that you didn't include at the beginning are almost always the loudest stakeholders when a decision is made that is the wrong decision, and they're saying, well, why weren't we involved? Expanding your team also gives you the ability to divide and conquer. We'll talk a little bit about some areas where this makes most sense, but think about there's certain needs of a marketing team and there's certain needs of an IT team within the same organization that may be related, but your views on it might be different. So you can get each of your needs met oftentimes in parallel, and that can be a real win there. And then this may sound obvious, but making sure the real decision makers are involved in selection is critical. Nothing slows down a selection process more than a core team making a decision and then having to sell it to the real decision makers, or the people who hold the purse strings within an organization. And if they're not able to do a good job convincing them that they've done their due diligence and they're making the right decision, that's where these projects tend to get bogged down. So involving those real decision makers early will help you speed up that approval process. Best practice number 2 is we recommend that you really challenge yourself to focus on what makes you unique, and you meaning your organization unique. This is a common slide that I'm sure you've seen us talk about before. Is we highly recommend that you do not start a selection process with a checklist of requirements. What you end up doing there is wasting a lot of energy in defining a lot of commodity type features of the technology that is out there today. And rather, an alternative approach, we want you to focus on creating custom scenarios and use cases that really paint a picture of, again, what makes your situation unique and what it is you're trying to do. This helps get your internal team on the same page, but also helps the vendors that you'll be sending these to really understand whether or not they're qualified or their solution's a good fit for what it is you're trying to do. And again, that'll help speed up the process because you're not wasting your time or their time. So this is something that we help our clients craft on a regular basis, and there's a bit of an art and science to this in that you want to create scenarios that are descriptive without being overly prescriptive. So we want to use real characters, real people, personas, make sure they're represented, real environments, real tasks, and real processes. And again, the key word there is real, so that this is getting at the core needs of what you're looking for, and not looking at just some of those commodity type features that everyone might be able to provide. And once you have those scenarios, we want you to test them. Test them when you send out your solicitation document, your RFP and D, and we'll talk about that next. Test via custom demos and test via head-to-head pilots. So again, because you've honed in on what it is that makes you unique, you're not wasting your time seeing what the vendors want to show you. We want them to show you what you want to see. Number 3 is create a shorter shortlist. So we know, I mentioned at the outset that we cover more than 250 products from 170 plus vendors. U.S. buyers have a lot of options out there, and that's usually a pretty good thing. Having options is good, but it can be very overwhelming. And we've seen clients come to us and say, well, we have a list of 20 to 50 products that we're doing some due diligence on and trying to get it down to the right one for us. And well, that's a daunting challenge. And I can tell you, as an analyst firm, that the reason we're in business is to help alleviate some of that initial legwork. So what I'm suggesting here is that you start with what we call scenarios, in terms of what technologies out there are fundamentally built for what it is you're trying to do. And so in each of the areas that we evaluate, we give ratings to the different technologies as to their suitability to some canonical scenarios that we've defined and divided the marketplace into. So for example, if you're looking at web content management technology, what we would ask you to do as a first step to kind of discriminate the different vendors out there, we want you to say, can you self-identify with one of these scenarios on the left here? Are you trying to do just basically a simple informational website, maybe some basic microsites and landing pages, or are you looking to do something really complex and build a multi-channel publishing platform? Are you a global enterprise that needs to publish to multiple countries and multiple different languages? What you'll find is different vendors are just fundamentally suited to catering to those scenarios. So if you use that as the first discriminator, you can get to a shortlist much quicker. Here's a screenshot from one of our online applications that we offer. But what I'm aiming to show here is this is called our shortlist generator, and some of our subscribers on the line today, I'm sure this is very familiar to you. This is just a way to navigate our research, and if once you self-identify with certain scenarios, we're able to quickly generate a list of vendors that are fundamentally suited for those different scenarios that you've identified. So we give them these Harvey balls, where you see these slices of the pie, if you will, where certain vendors are good at some areas, but they might not be so good fits in other areas. So if you do that, you can get to that shorter shortlist, and then really do your due diligence on your shorter shortlist as opposed to spending a lot of cycles and churn up front trying to come up with that shortlist. Number 4 is a recommendation that you skip the RFI and RFP and go right to an RFD, or what we commonly call an RFP and D. All right, lots of letters there. It's kind of an RF mania. So let me step back and explain. So a request for information is something that you send out, and you get our vendors to kind of tell us some basic facts about what their systems can provide. A request for proposal is just that. You ask for vendors to come back with a solution to what you've laid out for them. Quote is definitely getting some pricing, and demo is for them to come in and demonstrate their product's capabilities. So in some organizations, it's traditionally been done where you actually send out an RFI followed by an RFP, followed by an RFQ, followed by an RFD. In many organizations, they skip right to an RFP and then down select to a demo phase. All of those are perfectly fine approaches, but if you're looking to shortcut this process, we've been recommending to our clients that you, again, once you've done your due diligence, done your upfront research, and you're sure of your shortlist, go right to what we're calling an RFD or RFP and D, which is we're grandfathering a set of vendors to a demo phase. We're not wasting time sifting through a bunch of written proposals before we do that. We're automatically grandfathering a group of vendors to a demo phase, but you're still getting a written proposal along with that. You're just not taking up the time to go through it up front. So a couple things that we recommend when you do an RFP and D, we recommend that you tell vendors that they've been shortlisted. So maybe, hopefully, that increases their urgency and willingness to participate. Tell them that you've done your upfront research and put a lot of effort into coming up with your shortlist, and we want them to come in and now demonstrate your scenarios in the context of a demo. But when time is of the essence, I can't stress enough that you need to set some ground rules, and you need to establish some firm timelines. You need to tightly script the demo days, and you should really need to emphasize with the vendors that we don't want the canned demos that they show everyone else. We want something that's very much customized to our unique needs, and this is where you get the vendors to come in and demonstrate your use cases that you developed in the beginning stages, and so that you can see them in action. Really a much powerful way to do this, and a much better use of your time. And we're talking about this in the context of shortcutting the process, but this RFP and D approach is actually becoming more and more common in most of the engagements that we're doing today. People just want to get to the demos and see what these tools are offering, And I think that's a really viable approach that we're seeing work very well with our clients. Here's just an example of those strict timelines, and every demo is slightly different. This is sort of a half-day structure where we don't want the vendors to come in and give and spend 2 hours on their introductions or showing you their company overview and their PowerPoint slides. By the time you invite them to demo, you should know about them because you've done your research, you've done your homework, you know what their company is all about. Let's get right into those use cases and spend the bulk of the time doing something that's really meaningful to you and your team. Number 5, we recommend that you construct a proof of concept of just the right length. Now, if you've heard Real Story Group talk about a selection process in the past, you know that we put a very high emphasis on doing what we call a competitive proof of concept, sometimes called a bake-off, where you get your 2 finalist vendors to mimic a real project as closely as possible. And what we recommend there is that you set up a situation where you're building out real scenarios, you're inputting real content into the systems, you're getting your people to actually work with the systems and use the tools, and you're sometimes doing it within your actual technology environments to, again, create as real a situation as possible. Now, this can be a very resource-intensive challenge for many organizations. Most of the time we're talking about it from a cost perspective. And we always say, what's the cost of a failed implementation? Because the most successful projects do really place a lot of emphasis on this phase. But in our context of doing this in a hurry today, I think where it really can be challenging is from a timeline perspective. We've seen proof of concepts last 3 to 6 months at times, but we've also seen them really condensed. We've seen some as short as 3 days, and it's not ideal. It's far from ideal, actually, but it's better than skipping this entirely, which is what many organizations tend to do when they are in a super hurry. They tend to skip the POC, skip the bake-off, and just end up making a decision without this piece. But this is really the only time that you're able to get your hands on these technologies and really get a sense for what it's like to not only work with the technology, but work with the vendors and the integrators that are providing it. We always recommend that you include at least a half day of hands-on training for both your business users and your IT stakeholders. And this is an area where we mentioned earlier where it might make sense to divide and conquer. Instead of doing these types of trainings sequentially, you might be able to do these in parallel. Get the IT folks in the room looking at more of the administrative capabilities or what it's going to take to do integrations or installations, and get your business users a real sense of what it's like to work with the core functionality from a process standpoint and basically their day-to-day operational standpoint. Finally, the last tip I'll pass along is don't wait to negotiate. When we look at the full 20-step process, we have a step in here where you make your final decision, and in many cases we see that's where the negotiation starts and ends, is after you made a decision. And I can tell you from experience here that many times software deals tend to break down in negotiations. It's just a fact of any kind of purchasing situation, especially when it gets to as complex as some of these situations can be. And nothing stalls a project when a contract negotiation breaks down. And if you wait till the end, you're in some real trouble, because then you have to really back up in the process and waste days, weeks, if not months of time getting to a new decision with a vendor that you can come to an agreement with. So instead of this, what we recommend that you do is you negotiate early in the process. Excuse me. So the best practice here is that even after you've come up with your short list and you've invited people to come in and do demos, or even before they come in to do demos, start to get some pricing from them. So start those conversations around what they think it would take to give you a solution based on those scenarios that you've given them. When they come on site to do the demos, we want you to ask the tough questions around pricing, making sure that they understand what it is you're looking for. And what we found is if you do that with all of the vendors in consideration, you're able to get a much clearer picture as to an apples-to-apples comparison of pricing. And vendors will push back on this, but it's a good way of facilitating a learning situation, because you're learning about them, but they're also learning about you as you go through a process like this, and they should be able to give you an increasingly more accurate price as they go along. And what we've learned is that you really can't divorce this pricing situation from a selection process. It is a key factor of any selection. It needs to be a good financial fit and a good value fit for your organization. So have those conversations sooner, so that when you get to the final, more critical selection piece, when you're down to your finalists and you've made a decision, so that it's not a hard conversation there. It should be a pretty easy conversation to finalize the details, because you've been having the conversations throughout. So to recap, the 6 tips that we want to pass along to you today are: definitely avoid the temptation to scale down your selection team. Focus on what makes you unique, and spend more time looking at those features and functionality as opposed to the commodity features and functionalities. Create a shorter shortlist. Do your research up front. Place more emphasis on research to get you to the right vendor, so that you can spend the most of your time doing the due diligence on the right shortlist. We recommend skipping the RFI and RFP and going right to an RFD or an RFP and D, more accurately, because one thing that people can get confused with there is we don't want you to just do the demo without a proposal. You need that proposal in your hand, because you need to see all the details of what they're proposing, making sure that they truly understand what you're doing. So most of the case, it's more of an RFP and D. Number 5, construct a competitive proof of concept of just the right length. So if you're going to spend time here, if you're going to spend time in doing a selection, I don't want you to skip too much on the POC. Definitely try to shortcut it in ways where you're dividing and conquer with your IT and business teams, but make sure that you're able to do your due diligence, get your core stakeholders to use the system as they might, and make it as real as possible. And finally, don't wait to negotiate. Keep that conversation happening throughout, so that it doesn't stall a project at the end. So I hope these 6 things are helpful. I encourage you, for any of you new to RSG, if picking technology is something that you're interested in, we have a variety of ways that we can help you with that. The first, most obvious way is to check out our research. I encourage you to go to our website and download a sample. You can get a full chapter from any of our research streams. So that's a great place to start. If anyone wants a demo of our research services and some of the apps I showed, like the Shortlist Generator app, feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to walk you through that at any given time. If anyone needs more help beyond that, we're certainly willing to have a conversation about our consulting services and how we help a select group of companies every year go through these types of situations. So variety of ways that we can help, and we'd be glad to have the conversation with you. So thank you all for your time today. We did have one question about getting more details in the steps, because I went through them really quickly, our RSVP steps, but we will send all of you the slides shortly, I believe in the next 24 hours. My colleague Alina will be reaching back out to you with the slides. But if you have any questions once you see the slides, don't feel free to reach out to us, and we'll try to answer those questions as soon as possible. Thank you all for spending some time with me today. We just got it done in just under the half hour, and I wish you the best of luck in all of your selection processes, especially if you're in a hurry. Thank you.